Yes. Okay, Sha,
Oh, should we go?
I think we will go even
Yeah,
if Ricky
they're
is not.
coming. Everyone's jumping in one by one.
Okay, so what, shall we wait for the ones that are jumping in?
No, I think we're good to go. There's 12 of us in the room.
Let's just, yeah, so we'll
Good
just go
afternoon,
ahead.
ladies.
Hello. Hey, Michelle.
Hi, let me switch on video. I'm about to drive. I will get to the parking and then I'll be online. Don't worry.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you.
Right, let's kick in, guys. So welcome once again to our weekly session. We're so glad that you're here. For those of you who don't know, you're going to keep hearing pings. Don't mind that. That just means more people are joining the room. So here at Woman Eco, we have every Thursday a session, and we're so glad that you join us. As you know, that we have launched the series now for probably 13, maybe 14 weeks. When we knew that as COVID-19 hit us, we knew that we needed to do something. We needed to be relevant to you. And so we came up with Reimagine, Braving the New Normal. And we looked to you to actually lead us with these sessions and what did you want us to talk about. And each week you kind of spoke to us, and based on what you said, we just helped find a speaker, an expert, somebody who could come and talk to us around the issues that we knew you were having during this time. And I think we've moved through different phases. At first it was, how do we cope? How do we handle this now that we have to be all these different roles, from being cleaners and being cooks to moms and teachers to still having our day jobs. We navigated through it all, and we tried to help you through that. And then we moved on to values to ask you, as you're going through this, what kind of values are surfacing? What are you prioritizing as your values? And we also helped you understand, what are your values? Can you define them? And then can you claim them? And then we moved on to saying, we know that eventually you're going to go back to the workplace, and how do we start to serve you in the workplace? And we had a lovely session by Barbara a few weeks ago when she spoke to us about power and power analysis, and how do we use power, how do we claim our own power. And week on week, we've been building on that. Right now, we in, I think, probably the most important session, because now we help you to reintegrate back into what our work lives will be. So it's no more being at home, but it's about being between probably home and the workplace. And so just packing on the last 2 weeks, what we did talk to you about is how do you negotiate power? And then we moved on to thinking, how do we help you to collaborate and connect with women in the workplace? How do you find your collaborators in the workplace? And this week, we're so excited to bring you yet another ally that you can have in the workplace. And, you know, it's one thing about us unpacking about the sisterhood and how do we support each other in the workplace and what's at play when we are there. But one of the things we knew as well is that men come alongside us and they can be our allies in the workplace. And they can be amazing collaborators when we understand what is the tension, how do you manage those relationships, and how do you groom them and grow them with good boundaries so that we all win at the end of the day. So today, that's what we're going to dive deep into, understanding how do we do that. And we have an amazing speaker who I'm not going to tell you about. That's Ricky's job to go on and tell us all about who our speaker is for today. But welcome. As you know, every time I do this, I welcome you. I remind you that this time is sacred, that this time is your time to fully take care of yourself, to learn, to grow. So I'm sure there's lots of stuff happening. So I'm hoping that you can find a quiet moment for the next hour, an hour and a half at least, just to be fully focused, just to be present. So if there's any thoughts that are in your mind right now, like just label them and then park them away, and you know you'll pick them up at 6 o'clock when you're done with us. But in this moment, we want you to be fully engaged and fully plugged in. I'm going to remind you that we have the chat going as well. If you're listening on Facebook, please engage us on the chat. Send us a question, send us your experience if you don't want to speak. And then for those of us who are managing the chat, we're going to share what you're saying. So if you want to throw a question to the speaker as well, please do that on the chat. And then I'm going to invite you to do something which we normally do at the end, which we decided we're going to bring it to the front, because we like that. We're so agile and flexible, and we like to change things up for you. So we're bringing the poll up to the front because we're thinking some of the results from the poll is going to help our conversation today. And so I'm going to ask Tembela to share the poll quickly. And then for us who are in the room, please do us a favor and please engage with it. So there's 16 of us, and I think probably about 3 of us are not going to do it. So the rest of you, please do go ahead and do the poll for us, because that's really going to help the conversation today. Tembela, would you like me to quickly go through the questions? Sure, okay, so let me do that. So number 1 asks you, do you feel confident working with male colleagues as your allies? And yay, you guys are already engaging, thank you. Number 2 asks you, in the context of Black Lives Matters and racism, can male allies be trusted to center or champion women's issues? And our 3rd question is, has your experience of working with men, both as colleagues, how has your experience working with men and both as colleagues and allies been? And then your answers there obviously is good or not good. So far 7 of you have engaged, and so yay, thank you. We're gonna wait for you to continue with that. I cannot see Ricky. I do see Ricky in the room. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Ricky, and Ricky is going to do a quick introduction into our speaker. And then if you guys finish that poll, I'll come back and do a quick recap of what we're finding on the poll, and then we'll dive straight into that question. So Ricky, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us again today. I have the task of introducing our speaker today. We're going to be having an enlightening and interesting conversation with Dominic Kgaupepe. I met Dominic in the most weird, but I suppose modern way. I saw a post on Facebook on Branson's saying, we're looking to connect with diversity and inclusion specialists. And I followed up on that post, and that's how I met Dominic. Dominic is currently co-director of a company called Cohesive Collective. It is a diversity and inclusion company, and they work with some of the biggest corporate players that we've got in South Africa. They also work with schools. So Dominic is a person who's very much in touch with what's happening in the country around ensuring that we have equality in workspaces, in schools, in different social spaces. He's also a public speaker, also a writer. So someone who has very strong views in particular about race equality. And we're so looking forward to hearing his views about what it takes to build alliances and allyship between men and women in the workplace.
Great, thanks. So I think not everyone has seen or interacted with the poll yet. So should we just give it some time and we hand it over to Tembela to maybe start the conversation, and I can come in with the poll just in a few minutes when everyone's had a chance. Yeah.
Okay, we have about, how many people have responded to the poll?
So,
about 5 of 13 people. I think we should still give them a little bit of time. I see about 6 people. If we could at least have about, half of that number responding. But perhaps for those that have finished with the poll, you could actually start chatting with us on the same questions that we have put on the poll, because we have actually said today, as Shay was saying, we will invite our speaker only after we have done the poll and we have seen our thoughts and our experiences about working with men as allies. So we just want to give Dom a little bit of context into our world. I'm sure he's seen so much in his own work. So I'm not sure whether there are people who want to just come up and share some of their experiences of working with men either men as colleagues or men as allies. Perhaps before I can invite people, I can also share my own story. It's actually two stories. I have one story of an organization I was working with, and I was a leader in that organization. And I remember that I went through so much. I think I shared a little bit about that last week. I went through so much because I was thrown into this organization, and there were so many other things that were going on that I was not prepared for. So when I came into the organization, I was given a different picture from what was actually going on. So it was really not easy. And at that time, one of the biggest allies of mine was this man who was a board member in another organization. And I remember every time I went into his own organization, he would make time to sit with me, so that, because he knew that I was carrying a lot because I was a board member in my own organization. And as we were preparing for this session, it actually took me back to that time where I had someone, I guess when I look at all the people that I had around me, he was one person that I knew I could always go to any time of the day, and he would give me time. And he kind of mentored me in a very nice way without him saying, I'm being your mentor, but he just gave me time. He listened to me. And as a way of actually training me, he would invite me into his own organization so that I can also see how he's actually doing things. And I just know that, like, there are a lot of women that must have those kinds of experiences. And I think for us, I mean, I've thrown a number of questions today on Facebook as to whether we should even be talking about men as allies, given where we are at in the country and I guess across the globe. And I think for me, one of the big things was just to, being reminded that in as much as we would like to just say men are trash or give them names and labels and everything, because of course we're angry at men right now, but I think there's a lot of things that we can actually throw on, like from our relationship with men. On the other hand, when I moved on from that organization, I remember working with a young man who had PhD and I didn't have, and oh my goodness, I think it was one of the worst moments of my working career where I could go into an organization and then someone would actually undermine you literally in front of you, in front of staff. And you would wonder, and I came into that organization knowing that I'm coming in with a lot of experience, I mean, from the work that I've done before. But here I was being undermined by a young man who has got PhD. I don't know whether it was a PhD or whether it was because of his own upbringing as a man, growing up in a patriarchal context that made him to be that way. So I think all of us have got bad experiences and positive experiences of working with men. And I think for us, the issue is to say, as we talk about building our own power in the workplace, can we really lean on men as our allies? And then I think the other question is, what kind of men should we actually be talking to or like looking for allyship with? So I shared my story. I have bad experiences. I also have very good experiences of working with men. I don't know about you. We have 7 people that have responded. I don't know whether you want, let's just take one person who wants to share their own experiences and then we'll go straight into the poll.
I think you could raise your hand if you wanted to share.
Okay, let me share the poll.
Okay. Oh, maybe before we get into that, can we read what's on the chat?
Go ahead.
Let's just do the chat quickly before we dive into the poll. So Barbara says that I've had great support from my male colleagues. but been challenged by women leadership. My experience with my female boss was not good, unfortunately. Yeah, we find that a lot, don't we? Like, it's easier to work with men sometimes than it is with women. And then Nandi says, my one experience which made me wary of working with men is them struggling with my politics as a Black radical feminist. Yeah, we had that come up in a previous session as well, where they think of you as the angry Black woman every time you have something to say. And then Ricky shares. Ricky said, I've experienced a lot of sexual harassment and genderized violence with male colleagues, clients, and seniors that make me wary of working with them. On the other hand, male colleagues especially have collaborated well with me. Great. So yes, shall we do the poll quickly? If anyone doesn't have a hand raised, no one? Good. Okay, so the question one was, do you feel confident working with male colleagues as your allies? And we have a resounding 100%. So everyone who voted said yes to that question, which is great. Question two was, in the context of Black Lives Matters and racism, can male allies be trusted to center or champion women issues? And that was 100% as well. Am I reading this right?
No, I actually think we may need to ask people to redo the poll.
Is it?
I don't think it is reading right.
Oh, yeah, because I did think I saw some no's, so I don't think this poll results are right.
Yeah, it was different a few seconds ago.
Yeah. Can we ask people to redo it? Sorry.
Yeah, I think so anyway. Okay, so Skolile also shares on the chat. While you guys are re-engaging that poll, I'm going to just share some more that's on the chat. So Skolile says, my experience has been with sexism, and that knows no boundaries. And Mamamone says, my experience with male colleagues have been great. Some male colleagues believes gender equality. Other than most female colleagues that I currently have, women tend to be bossy and not supportive. That's really interesting. I must say, I share that view. I work with mostly men in my where I currently work, and the men are very collaborative and very inclusive to a large degree. And the women I work with are quite cattish. And so I tend to kind of gravitate towards finding male colleagues to work on projects with, rather than with the females. I don't have the energy for the cattishness or for the competition that comes with it. So I do definitely agree with that perspective. Does anyone else want to share something?
Can I just share what is on Facebook? Spiwa Kumalo is saying, we are unique, Sisi. We don't need men. I think we are ready for the poll, share.
Okay, cool. Should we end it? 8 of 13 people engaged it, so yes. Oh, this is better. This looks better. Okay. So for question one, we still have 100% who said yes, that they do feel confident working with male colleagues as allies. Question two, 63% said that in the context of Black Lives Matter and racism, male allies can be trusted to center and champion women's issues, and just 38 said no. And the last question, 88% said that their experience with working with men, both as colleagues and allies, have been good. Just 13% said that it was not good. So that's the poll, and that's quite interesting. Just one last chat maybe to share before we move and hand it back to Timbela. Busi says, I had a similar experience to Barbara and also had a male colleague who became an ally and a sponsor, and that made a big difference. Yay. Awesome,
Wow.
Timbela.
It's actually quite interesting to see the results of this poll. On one hand, you have somebody who say, hey, we don't need men, we are okay. We are self-sufficient as women. And of course, we also know that our workplaces are workplaces that are male dominated. I mean, if you look at the structures, if you look at the practices, if you look at the systems of those workplaces, they are all dominated by men, and the ideas, whether you're talking about performance or what, is always, I mean, we always lean more on men, you know, they kind of favor men. So it's actually quite interesting to see 100% of people who have responded to this poll actually saying they have trust in men. And also, given the context of where we are at, because like at the end of the day, our workplaces are not insulated from what is going on around us in society. It's very interesting for me to find that even with the high levels of violence against women that we are seeing in society, in our homes, we still have this trust in men. And I actually wonder, what does that say to us? And it would be nice to hear from you, like our audience, and perhaps Dom as well, what he hears from that. But also, like, again, in terms of racism and the experiences, people are still saying they've got very good experiences of working with men, both as colleagues and as allies. So I don't know, like, I just want to throw this back to you before we call in Dom, to say, what do you read from this, given the context where we are at? What do you read from the results of that poll? Are there any surprises for you? Are you as surprised as I am? I see that Score has her hand up.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. A very interesting topic. I think for me, I'm taken aback with question 2, by the way, because I'll speak from experiences of South Africa, where issues of race and freedom superseded issues of gender equality. So I am very intrigued by the point that most people are leaning towards saying that in the context of Black Lives Matters, then it's easy to work with men, and we think men will contribute towards gender equality. I am unsettled by that, because I actually want us to further interrogate that and say, in which spaces are we saying that is actually happening? Because I look in the politics, women are second. I look in the economy, women are still second. I look in the social spheres, women are still second. So which spaces are we actually talking about where issues of race have actually been partnered with issues of gender equality? I mean, look at how we got into our democracy as South Africa. Women were now used as an upper hand. And today we're still experiencing that women are used as an upper hand. They are not used, they are not included because there is intention to include them. There is always a, okay, if we include them, what is in for us? And so I really want us to interrogate the what is in for us and the what is in for men who then partner with women. Because we also need to we need not take the blindly that a man will champion you. What then becomes his public image when he champions a woman? I mean, I've been reading a book by someone where at some point she actually felt she did not align with some of the values of a man who was actually championing her. So I'm taking us back again to the values that we've been discussing as well. So when do we, I think it's really, for me, we really need to interrogate this aspect of gender equality and women's rights in relation to the context of everything else. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. That's you raising quite an important thing. Can I just call in Ricky as well to add on that?
Hey, Tembela, Nandi's hand was up, so maybe
Nandi,
Nandi
I didn't see. Oh,
yeah.
Sorry, I didn't see. I need to change my, yes. Nandi?
Thank you, Ricky. Thank you, Tembela. So I think, I mean, I did see, yeah, so I was also a bit surprised by that people felt that women's issues are centered
in in the Black Lives Matter protest. There's very few instances where I've seen it, particularly when you think about the South African context and the high levels of violence that we experience in South Africa as gendered bodies, right? I also for me, it's some of the language can get problematic because we look at gender, or at least we're referring to gender in a very binary way inside of this conversation, which leaves out other bodies. And that's the nature of how particular bodies get left out when we're talking about who gets centered inside of various different conversations. But I think if we're looking at the Black Lives Matter movement a bit broadly and how it speaks to other systemic issues which are just as problematic, but explicitly, I don't think, for me, my experience has not been, men as allies. I also see it within, for example, I'll use the People's Coalition, as a movement, even with those kinds of coalitions or movements where we're talking about, challenges faced by the Black working class, a lot of the time, there's a particular voice, and patriarchy will take root and it will center itself inside the conversation in ways that are harmful to women. So for me, the results of the poll were quite astounding, and maybe it's because I don't work in corporate. I've always worked in civil society, and my work lends itself to me, like I said, being a bit wary of men and their politics and how they treat and interact with women and other gendered bodies.
Thank you, Nandi, for raising those issues. And I think Ricky can also help us in terms of responding to some of the issues that you're raising.
Yeah, so what I was going to say is I also found the poll results very surprising. But I think that maybe we need to be sharpening the questions that we're asking ourselves, because it doesn't help us to talk about collaboration, to talk about allyship, to talk about sponsorship and support for the individual. I think we're talking about them for the cause, which is the cause of gender equality in the workplace. And I think if we sharpen the question and we really ask, in that sense, because I've been trying to troll through my own experiences, and of course I've got wonderful experiences of male colleagues and seniors stepping in for me, mentoring me, supporting me as an individual. I don't have that many experiences when what I'm standing for is gender equality. And I really wish that Nandi was, I wish Ntata was with us today, because I remember in her session, she said, I was doing great with support right up until I said gender pay gap. And then I could get no support anymore, right? And that's an exact example of being able to distinguish between the support I get as an individual and the support that you get for the kind of advocacy, rights, and issues that enable women to have authentic lives and to participate equitably in the workplace.
Hi. I just want to bring some points from Facebook, and then we could probably invite Dom to share his own thoughts, listening to what has, first listening to the poll itself, the results of the poll, and the issues that have just been raised by the three people that have actually spoken. to and just share what are you hearing, what are your thoughts from what you are hearing. But let me just read two comments here. One is from Spiwa saying, that's true, Tembela, most work is male dominated. I've had an experience where males refused to be led by a woman and couldn't stand it at all. I ended up not knowing whether it's gender problem or color question. And Michelle Festa says, I just joined. I might have missed quite a bit. My concern is not really about trusting men or not. It's really about who supports patriarchy and who actively takes a stand against it and all other forms of injustice. So Dom, I don't know whether you want to come in there. You've heard what has been raised. Very vibrant discussion right from word go. We are challenging each other, how we look at things, like as though they are black and white. And in that process, we actually leave out a lot of other voices in that process. And I actually think this is one of the things that we need to be working with within Womaniko as well. Yeah, so do you want to come in?
Absolutely. Feels like a setup. What will I come in and say? But I think first and foremost, thank you very much for inviting me, just to be able to share and provide some of my perspectives where these matters are concerned. And I think I'm also showing up here not as an expert, I'm really showing up as a student, because I realize that even within my own personal journey, there's a lot of learning that I'm needing to do. There's a lot of unlearning that I'm needing to do. But to the best of my ability, I hope that you will find me sincere and you will find me genuine regarding some of the views that I'll share. Some of the views that I'll share will not be conventional. I'll try to say the things really that are in my heart versus things that I think will be great when people hear them, because I'm trying to score points. Because these are serious matters. And in order to deal with serious matters, we really need to engage in a way that is honest, a way that is considered, a way that has depth. So let me start with the first Facebook comment that came through. We don't need the men. Well, I know that we need you, right? As much as there is day and night, as much as the moon and there is the sun, and there is fire, there is water, there is also the sacred male and female. Men cannot be without women and women cannot be without men. And so for me, I really move from that point in recognizing that each of us have something that is inherent and sacred within us that we need to bring to the world. There are certain things that my wife does and she does them amazingly well, and no matter how much I try, I will never be able to do that which she does. Likewise, there are things and qualities that I believe that I bring in this union that we're building, and both of us, the yin and the yang, the male and the female, husband and wife, as a team, produce a very strong unit that ensures that we not only take care of each other, but also take care of the children that we're bringing within this family to ensure that they're also responsible for the societies that they have. So that's like my starting point. My starting point is we need you. You may not need us, but I know for a fact that we need you, because without you, we cannot be. From some of the comments that went through with the polls, and also some people indicating that, they found that they've had better relationships with their male colleagues or with their male bosses versus their female bosses, there's often explanation for that. When you think of corporations and how does the corporations have been formed, and you can think of South African corporations, you can think of corporations in the United States, Canada, or the United Kingdom. We normally run quite a cool exercise in the organization that I work, that I've built and work for, Cohesion Collective. So we do an exercise where we ask people that work within these corporations that if they were to put their organization into human form, what would this person look like? So if we were to take your organization and make it a person, what race would they be? What gender would they be? What would their sexual orientation be? What class would they belong to? Upper class, upper middle class, lower class, middle class? What language would they speak? What religion would they practice? So for people to really conceptualize that if they were to take their organization, be it a bank, be it a law firm, be it a logistics company, and put it into human form, what would this person look like? What's been fascinating for us whenever we run this exercise is that invariably we always end up with this white, straight man who's able-bodied, Christian-ish, so feels like he grew up in a church, but doesn't really put that Christian thing in people's faces, is upper class and English speaking. And so you must understand that for most organizations that are personified in this way, you must think of this personification as the owner of the house that you work in, okay? You're working at their house, and this is this person's house. And in this person's house, essentially, we're all trying to live up to whatever values this person espouses. And so from a women and men perspective, and some of the dynamics that happen, and people say that they've got better experiences with their male counterparts as bosses versus female counterparts. Some of the explanations that we've found and I've heard within corporations have been as follows. The women that have really made it big within corporations, often, if they're not conscious, make it by assimilating into the dominant culture. And therefore, it means that for you to be recognized as a director, vice president, or CEO, you need to have assimilated to this culture of maleness, where everything that is feminine is something that you strip off yourself in order to play the game with the big boys, so to speak. And in the process of assimilating into the dominant culture, we often lose those values, we often lose those qualities that actually are quite crucial and are needed within our corporations, where we begin to say, okay, let me not have the emotional conversations. And everything else that is assumed is what women bring within the spaces. But really the point being that whenever we assimilate into the dominant culture, there's aspects of ourselves that we lose, not only from a sex perspective, but even from a race perspective. Hence why the blacks that make it in corporate are the ones that we deem to be the clever blacks. You know, if all other blacks could be like you, then South Africa would work out, because there's a particular assimilation and a value system that we play to in order to make it within these organizations. And so for me, really, I think that is a tragedy, that there's aspects of ourselves that we cannot bring in order to build our careers and to build the corporations that we're working for and working in. And so for me, the powerful position that we can get to, men and women, black, white, Indian, colored, is at that point where we can be our full, authentic self, because that's when our organizations actually benefit from the diversity that we bring. Whenever we are assimilating into a particular culture, rather than being fully included for the people that we are, a lot is lost, because then we begin to mold into something that we are not. And hence why people will say, yeah, my female bosses are a lot more tougher on me than I find what my male bosses are. Not because they're inherently bad, no. But we need to recognize a system within which they're operating within. And therefore, what is this system calling them to be in order for them to make it within it?
Thank you, Dom. I think you're raising again the issues around the systems that, I mean, it's actually very sad, because I think, as Ricky was saying, earlier, we've had quite a number of times where, and we also know a lot of women who find that like they get compromised because of the systems in which they find themselves in, and unfortunately, those systems, like as you say, they really make us to lose who we are. So it's, and then like what you are saying is actually quite an interesting analogy that you are bringing, where we tend to see our organizations as males and all that, because exactly that's what they represent most of the times. And then the question, I think, for us is, if our work institutions represent this male, white, straight person and all that, how do we then talk about looking at men as allies?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me take an unconventional stance, and hopefully I won't get myself into too much trouble. And I hope I'll explain myself to the best of my ability so that you hear that which I'm saying and from where it is that I come. From an allyship perspective, it's absolutely necessary, given what it is that others may be privileged, to be privileged to have a voice of influence, to be privileged to be always considered to be the person that is competent and knows what they're doing. And there's two ways in which we can respond to that privilege that may be given to us, whether merited or not. That I can either feel guilty about this privilege that I hold, or I can begin to recognize how I can utilize this privilege in order to create space for those of my colleagues that I know are automatically undermined by virtue of their identity, not because they are any less educated, not because they are any less smarter, not because they don't work any less harder, but because of how it is that they see, given the history of our world, given the history of our societies, how do I use my privilege as a man in order to be able to provide that space? When myself and a female colleague are engaging with a client and the client is speaking to me all the time because obviously I must be the boss in this relationship, do I feel guilty about that which I'm seeing as an interaction? Or when I'm asked the question, how do I turn to my female colleague and say, I do not know about that, but what do you think? So that I'm bringing her in and creating that space. So there's aspects here where when we are conscious as men and are conscious of our privilege, we can utilize that privilege in order to create the space and support our female counterparts within the workspace. So that's point number one. Point number two, which tends to be the one that can be quite controversial, but this is honestly how it is that I see things, is I don't believe that women as a group across racial lines have the same challenges within corporate South Africa. I don't think that the challenges of the Black female are exactly the same as the challenges of a white female. Absolutely not, given my understanding of what the current global system of power is. The greatest beneficiaries of affirmative action in the United States and Canada, the UK, and even South Africa were first and foremost white women. White women benefited so well from affirmative action that we had to remove them from what we call designated groups, in order to then have far more targeted approach regarding how do we bring the African, Indian, and colored people into our workspaces. White women can walk with women of color along the journey regarding how it is that we empower ourselves as women, but there will always be a crossroads. And for me, the crossroad is quite political, because I can be able to stand with you as my sister, being white and Black females that are walking together. But the crossroads will come when I realize that some of these policies that we're advocating for may hurt my white son. All right? And that's where really things come into a crossroads, where we realize that yes, we may be women, but actually the challenges that we're facing and how it is that we are navigating these spaces of power and within corporates are not exactly the same. All right? We find solidarity in being women, but it does not necessarily mean that in the white system of power that we're facing the exact same challenges, and therefore can overcome them jointly as we go through the process. So I know it may sound a little bit controversial, but I committed to you that I'll speak my heart to the best of my ability, and I'll answer to the best of my ability with the questions and challenges that.
That's so true. I don't know whether there are any people here who want to raise some questions to Dom, but I'm just I just want to pick up on what you are saying in terms of consciousness, and also the issue of like how do you respond to your own privilege. It's actually a question that we were discussing. I'm so sorry for the noise in the background. Somebody's printing something in the office. So we actually had this kind of a discussion on Saturday, and we had both Black and white people in the midst. And I think the whole issue we were trying to grapple with was the issue of race. And the question I think a lot of people left with was, so what do I do with my privilege? Is it enough, for instance, for me to just feel guilty that I'm privileged? Does that change anything? Does that change the systems that oppress women? It actually doesn't. And I think you are right in saying until you have that level of consciousness and an actually commitment to do something about it. And I think for me, the question is, whilst I'm also inviting other people to come up with their own questions, is what do you do with people who are not conscious? Because at the end of the day, I remember working with a number of men who couldn't understand how they were showing up in the workplace and how the way in which they were showing up was actually hurting a lot of us in the organization. And when we tried to bring and raise these issues with some of them, we actually realized that they had no clue. They had no clue, and in fact, they would tell you that I'm not one of those who are out to hurt women or whatever. I support women, you know. So how do you deal with this? How do you deal with the issue of consciousness in the context of organizations? Because until we are conscious, the systems that we confront or that actually bind us and limit how far women can actually go in organizations will forever be there. I don't know. I don't just want to raise this question to Dom as well. I mean, if there are other people in the audience who want to come in, you can also come in.
100%. And I think just to give a little bit of a perspective regarding how do we raise that consciousness, we must absolutely understand that, like it or not, organizations are actually the schools through which adults need to be re-educated, because all of us have been grossly miseducated, unfortunately. The miseducation has been so systemic and so thorough and methodical that there are people that received titles called doctor and professor when they wrote books, when they made the argument that women were physically, mentally, emotionally incapable of working within corporations. And from this research, these people were recognized as professor and doctor. This is the kind of unlearning that we're needing to do in order to be able to see our counterparts as equal to us, who are just as capable and many times even better. But until we unlearn those things that we've been taught, it becomes very difficult, because I see you through a lens where I've been conditioned to devalue your contribution, to devalue your opinion, to devalue your work, rather than recognize that your work is just as important as is mine. And so organizations do need to engage in a lot of education from a race perspective, from a gender perspective, from all the other diversity dimensions that we're trying to get into grips with within our working spaces. The education component must also extend beyond the corporation. So how am I educating my son? In the way in which I treat my wife, in the way in which I carry myself within the household. How do I ensure that in my private life, I'm just as consistent as in my public life? Because often we try to separate the public from the private, not recognizing that true character is when we can no longer tell the difference between our private life and our public life, and we're quite consistent in everything that we do. And so the education absolutely must happen from a corporate perspective, but even within our families and societies, how it is that we as men especially model what it is that it means to be a man. Then we can get this right from an education perspective. And I think we also need to be very careful that we do not demonize that which is inherent, because sometimes we engage in conversations and terms get used. So for example, masculinity then gets seen as something that is bad. Masculinity is not bad, it just is. But how it is that we utilize that masculinity will determine whether we've got positive or negative outcomes. And so if men can be comfortable to be themselves and confident to be themselves, but always mindful that they are not superior or any better to their female counterparts, that's when I think we begin to win. How can we bring ourselves authentically to the best of our abilities without having to assimilate in what it is that we think we're expected to be within particular spaces?
I'm going to invite Ricky to come in, but I would also, perhaps you can tap into that, Ricky, as well. And then I would also be interested to hear what other people think. Just on that last point exactly, Dom, you were raising of not, demonizing masculinity. Yes, yeah. I would love to hear from other people in terms of what they think. Again, it's also about talking about this within the context in which we find ourselves. How do we deal with this tension? Ricky?
Thanks, Tembela. Before I jump in, I just want to return to some of the comments on our chat. So, Dom, the feedback is that there's a lot of understanding and of your analogy of who owns the house, the personification of the organization, and just how much assimilation women have to do in order to become successful in the workplace. So there was a lot of, wow, that's so true, I totally agree, etc. And then towards the end of your last comment, Felicity wrote, it starts in the household. How we are all raising our children and saying which child makes better sense than the other. Like the girl child cannot express themselves without bringing emotions. Labeling the girls as talkative and the boy child as if they're talking is a fact. So Felicity is really talking about the conditioning that you were talking about, the conditioning that is happening in our homes, and I suppose the challenge of trying to undo and unlearn when we're already adults. And so we have to understand that organizations and workplaces live within a societal context, and we can't see the bulk of this work is only taking place in an organization. There also has to be societal level work. But what I wanted to raise with you, Dom, is, you know, the people on this group have been on quite a journey through this lockdown. And the lockdown and the pandemic itself has surfaced so much of the inequality in the workplace. And I guess what I'm asking is, we have talked about a new norm as participants in this workspace. As participants in this workspace, in this discussion space, we've had to think about how we would like to be as women in the workplace going forward. My question is, have men been thinking about a new norm? And has there been the emergence of a new man? If you think about the lockdown space where you've been at home and you can't run away from how hard and how unfair the work-life balance is, how much is sitting on women's shoulders. Has there been enough of a shift with remote working opportunities for men to become real allies on some of the gains that are needed in the workspace to make it a workspace that is comfortable for women and where women can be authentic? Yeah, I think that's a key question I want to raise. Being at home has taught us so much about what's not working in our workplaces. Have men kind of seen those things?
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Ricky. I think the one thing that's been absolutely fascinating for me regarding the COVID-19 pandemic and how it's played out throughout the global community is that COVID-19, if we really think about it, it's not a system-changing event. It's actually a system-revealing event. What COVID-19 has done is just reveal the fractures and cracks that have already been there. But because we've all learned to try to get along with it, we've all learned to try to cope with it, we've all learned to live with the craziness and the ludicrousy of what it is that we're expected to be when we are professional, COVID-19 has just magnified and exposed that. What COVID-19 has done from a socioeconomic perspective is to let us understand and appreciate that those that were doing well before COVID-19 will probably still continue to be okay. Because even though we were all on lockdown looked very different depending as to your socioeconomic status. I am now fortunate enough that I was in lockdown in my nice 4-bedroom home versus the house that I grew up in, which was 2 rooms, not 2 bedrooms, 2 rooms. I understand that I am part of the exception, especially from my community, that 90% of people that look like me were in lockdown in very closed and confined spaces. Lockdown and working from home has meant, when we look at gender-based violence that's been happening in South Africa, that the very homes that we're supposed to be comfortable in for many of our women are actually war zones. Because for them, there is no peace, but still, they're needing to put up the facade to their manager, to their team, that I'm still trying to be productive. And I'm still trying to work from home, and we're not appreciating the very human elements that come with working from home. COVID-19 pandemic has literally been able to, magnify and reveal to us that we could have been working remotely all of this time, and we've been using all sorts of nonsense excuses regarding how does the people ought not to be working from home. But it's also forced us to realize that we can no longer claim that when we come into organization, we must leave all of our personal matters at home. Because when you're in our organization, you must be professional. COVID-19 pandemic was like, no, we are human and we are human all of the time. It's just that whenever we go into these physical spaces called companies, we need to suppress those aspects of ourselves that are human in order to show up as this robot that's just constantly smiling, has it all together, does not have any issues, and is going to deliver all the time, every time. What we're needing to do and what we're being called to do now is around having to relearn how we negotiate our space, having to relearn how it is that we negotiate what delivery looks like, having to learn how to exercise actual compassion, because some of our colleagues, even though they're at home as parents, are at home as caregivers, are at home as educators, are at home as cleaners. If you cannot afford to pay for help that can come and be in the home and be able to assist wherever domestic responsibilities are concerned. And so if managers are going to sit there and not acknowledge that I now have people within my team that are there as parents, some of them are caregivers for people that are bedridden or are on wheelchairs, and how do I now need to negotiate what delivery looks like so that we actually prioritize the things that we need to do versus that other junk that's nice to do, but otherwise all of us always need to send emails so that we're seen as valuable and we're seen as indispensable within the organization. All of that is emotionally, physically, and mentally exhausting. And I've also really had men realize, and I've enjoyed this, me realizing that I actually love to be at home. Although I'm working some long hours at home, nothing replaces my son having the option to walk through the door to show me his teddy bear that he received today because we decided to finally take him back to school. You can't get those moments when you're in that physical space within the workplace. Many men have realized that they would love to play a more active role from a parenting perspective, because many go through careers and then by the time you're retired, you realize the time has passed you by and you've never been a father, because you always thought to yourself that that which your children need from you is the money that you make, never realizing that the greatest gift that you can provide them is the gift of your presence, the gift of your love, the gift of you deliberately and constantly pouring into them so that you're raising them as great and strong young men and women. And I'm by no means romanticizing this to say all men are now recognizing this. No, some are still there in their woeful ignorance, not realizing that there are many things that are needing to be juggled in order to be able to deliver. But certainly we can use this opportunity in order to begin to think in very serious ways regarding what does the world of work actually look like. Do we need people to be arriving at 7:30 a.m. and leaving at 7 p.m. and we're thinking that's a hard worker and that's a healthy working relationships? We're needing to be moving our consciousness to realize that we've not been born to work. We don't live to work, but rather we work to live. Right? And so once we are able to shift that from a consciousness perspective, and we get more leaders within the corporate space to realize that the human comes first, over and above these products and services that we're providing, perhaps we can be able to get this new normal that can be designed. But unfortunately, my realistic self says many people would not have learned the lessons that COVID-19 has provided. We'll go back to work with the same consciousness that got us into this mess. But for those that have the raised consciousness, we still carry that responsibility in order to challenge and say, what can a different work relationship and environment look like to enable everyone within our space to actually excel and be their best and authentic selves within it.
Wow, thanks. And that was quite a helpful question, Ricky. As to whether men are talking about the new normal. And then I think your responses, Dom, are quite helpful there, that actually, because I think that's also what has been coming up in most of our conversations, that actually this time of working from home has revealed a lot of inequalities, have revealed a lot of things that we have normalized that we shouldn't have. And then, I mean, you work with a lot of companies, you meet leaders and everything. And I think for me, the question is, who is speaking about these issues, about the shifts that we need to be seeing in the workplaces? Because, and where are the spaces where these things are being spoken about? And where are the spaces where we should actually be talking about these issues? Because what we've had in the past few weeks is that I mean, all the issues that you are raising, those issues have come up from the conversations that we've had. The only thing is that a lot of women that have been participating in our platforms are saying they feel powerless. They are even scared of raising these issues because they're scared of losing their jobs, they're scared of being victimized and all that. And hence we actually came up with this series of saying, how do we build our power so that we do not sit and die in our own corners when we know that what is happening around us doesn't serve us. So you are speaking to leaders, you have access to them. Who's speaking about these issues? And I think you could also talk about, you could also tap into, I mean, in your responses in terms of, I mean, the question that we're asking of men as allies. Where do we start?
Absolutely. So many organizations are awakening to having to put, like diversity and inclusion structures in place in order to, champion and bring these discussions to the fore. Some organizations that are a little bit more advanced are organizing groups. So there'll be like LGBT groups, so there's women's groups, there's working moms groups, in order to ensure that, they're actively soliciting that feedback and how it is that they can support as organizations. But that being said, that's a very small percentage of organizations that are that conscious in order to be, getting this information and actually acting on it. Most organizations still go on with the mantra that, yeah, you must just leave all of your stuff at home. When you arrive here, you must be professional. I don't care what's happening at home, as long as you deliver, that's what we're interested in within our workspace. But that kind of thinking will not enable those organizations as we go forward, because we need to be creating more human organizations. Right? Where these discussions are concerned, it's important that the people that are most impacted are able to champion, because they know the experiences that they are going through and will continue to go through within spaces. We as men will be allies with you, but there's certain things that you will say to your sister that you will not need to explain, because she'll understand exactly what you mean. Whereas for me, you'll need to bring me in the picture, because it's just not my reality. But that being said, it's important that we do build this allyship and build these relationships so that we as men can also understand the strife, can also understand the challenges that our female counterparts are going through. So that in these platforms, whether we're talking diversity and inclusion forums, whether we're talking inclusion projects that the organizations are taking through, that we go beyond our personal interests and also ensure that we speak to the interests of others. And once again, going back to how it is that we utilize our privilege to repurpose it in order to provide a voice for those that typically get undermined within the institutions that we work in.
Yes, and then okay, there are some comments on the chat, and I actually want to know, Dom, perhaps you could take a break whilst either Cher or Ricky read the comment on chat. But I think for me, the question is, I mean, what you are raising now, that yes, as women, or the groups that are really feeling the pinch should actually take up, the struggle, and you can come in as allies. It's a question that had actually crossed my mind, that, I mean, earlier on, that, I mean, if we know that, especially for people who are already conscious, if we know that things, the way they are not the way they're supposed to be, should we wait until you are called in? Or I don't know. I guess it's not a question just to you. It's a question to the participants as well in this in this call. Should men, for instance, wait until they are called in to say, hey, we're banning or we're suffering here, when they actually can see what's going on? But also the other question is, if you say yes, as men, you can be allies, and I think the question is how might that look like in practice? And before you answer that, let me just bring in Ricky. I know that she's got a question to raise, and also perhaps read some of the comments on the chat, whilst I'm also looking at whether there is anything on Facebook. Ricky, do you want to come in?
Thanks, Thembela. let me just read. There's quite a long comment here on the chat from Dumi. It says, one thing I've noticed as a coach in various companies around the world is that huge gaps and limitations in managers and leaders have been exposed during COVID-19, especially their ability to navigate the virtual space. Far more female managers and leaders have been more successful in managing and navigating the next normal of the COVID-19 virtual space. What is it that women do better exactly? In my view, women have been doing this all along and are far more versatile with greater nuanced skills than most men, possibly more at home and at work. This is what some lower EQ men can't deal with and resort to aggression. These skills women keep showcasing are invaluable for the post-COVID-19 workplace.
Absolutely.
So just picking up on where Tembela was, Dominic, the issue is how? You know, Tembela asked the question, well, first of all, should we be seeking allies? If we know, as Dumi says, if we know what is right, why not men, why men, colleagues, male leaders not stepping forward in order to really draw from the value that women bring in the workplace? So that's the one question. But the second question is, and I think this is an issue that's on the mind of everybody. How do you generate male allies? Like, where do you start? How do you reach them? How do you get heard by them? How do you draw them as male allies into the issues that women want to see taken seriously in the workplace?
Absolutely.
Tom, before you come in, can I just bring in perhaps a different perspective or another perspective from somebody who's on Facebook? Kitabile Mabe is saying men as allies within the context of organization. I think we need organizations to create an environment that is conducive for collaboration to address disparities. A space where both men and women can be vulnerable to each other. And one say, how do you want to be treated? And the other says, this is how I want to be treated. Parity cannot be achieved overnight, but it starts with consciousness and admission that there are disparities and willingness to work together to turn around the situation. Together, we then map out what needs to be done and how we achieve that together. We cannot exclude men in this process. If we do, we create an us and them situation. And that is a fertile ground for antagonistic space. Allow men to express themselves as well. Let's not have those conversations alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me take this offside, and then I'll bring it back inside to really contextualize it. From an offside perspective, I'm hoping we'll be able to appreciate the following, that which we're trying to deal with here goes beyond just our organizations. It's actually a global system that is at play. And from this global system, the organizations in which we work form the microcosm of that which globally we're trying to deal with. What do I mean by this? Imagine the scenario that has played out in these past few weeks. So, right, there's a particular country, self-proclaimed the greatest nation in the world, who have the highest COVID-19 cases currently within their space, have the highest deaths internationally that have resulted from COVID-19, had a solid straight 2 weeks of civil unrest that happened within their country, are currently $13 trillion in debt. And in spite of everything that's been happening in that country, I would like to challenge any of you to Google from S&P, from Moody's, and any of these other credit agencies, whether they've relooked the outlook of where the United States is. And I'd like us to take the exact same scenario that I've just described to you and transport it to any African country, maybe let's say South Africa. That if South Africa had these high infection rates of COVID-19, highest death rate, 2 weeks of civil unrest, a country that is in debt, what that outlook would look for us would probably be termed less than junk status by now. In South Africa, for us, even thinking about land expropriation without compensation draws attention to then say, you're playing in a field here that you're not supposed to be, you need to stay in your lane. Meanwhile, those that are actually maintaining power can have the most horrendous conditions, and yet they're not going to be touched. Now that I've taken offside, how can I make sense of it inside? And I'll do the best of my ability. Whenever you're in a position of power, you also have the power to define that which is seen as good or bad. As a man, if I request time in order to go and attend to my son's sports event, I am probably seen as a good father within my corporation. Whereas my female colleague will be seen as a person that's not quite committed to their work because they're now taking time off in order to attend to their children. When I leave work at 9 p.m. in the evening, I'm seen as a hard worker. When my female colleague who's a mother leaves work at 9 p.m., she's probably viewed as a bad mother. Same situation, but depending as to who's in power, the consequences and perception can be completely different. That which we're trying to deal with here, I'm just describing from a global system, but it translates into the microcosm within our organization. Therefore, that which we need to now practically do, and why allyship is still important in how it is that we get things right, is how do we as men also own up to this nonsense? And so whenever someone is having a comment to then say she's not committed to her work because she's leaving early to attend to her family, we call out those kinds of narratives and behavior and then say, would you say the exact same thing about me as a man if I engage in the exact same behavior? Because when we begin to really synthesize and simplify that which we are experiencing and not get caught up in all these intellectual conversations in how it is that we are, interpreting different actions from different people, but really simplify them and have very logical discussions, we begin to sift through the BS that we've all brought into in order to begin to produce systems where women know that they can belong, they can be themselves, and can still have a successful career. From a practical perspective, I need to be thinking within my space. So for example, in my organization, I am quite deliberate. How do I ensure that I find Black female partners to be partnering with? How am I putting them into projects? How are we going to clients together? How am I creating opportunities that the clients realize that this Black female is not just here to score political points, but she's actually amazing. And what we're doing is using our platform in order for you to see that she is amazing. How do I ensure that I call clients out whenever they're telling us that they can't find good Black X, they can't find good female leaders, they can't find good female engineers. Whenever they're looking for them, they just can't find them. How do I utilize that network where I can prove to them that, you've just brought into narratives. The leaders are there, the accountants are there, the engineers are there. And if you've got the will to bring them into your organization for them to impact and come and build their careers, we absolutely can get it done. So there are things that are practical that we can be able to engage in. If I'm working in an organization and, for example, I sit in the team that decides on procurement, how am I influencing those procurement decisions? Which businesses are we sourcing from? What's the ownership of those businesses looking like? If we do source from a Black female-owned business, how am I insisting in my organization that when we look at payment terms, we are enabling these businesses rather than killing them? Because if I bring a business that is owned by Black women, and now I'm subjecting you to 90 days and 120 days payment terms, I am now complicit in the very system that's ensuring that it will be hard for you as a woman to make it in the business, in the corporate, with what it is that we're trying to build. And so we need to get very practical and move away from the things that are wishy-washy and say within the systems and what it is that we can influence, what's the voice that I'm bringing in that can enable that women can truly succeed internally and externally, and how does that will provide support?
I don't want to put, I want to bring in other people. I like what you are saying, Dom, in terms of being practical. And I know that, in fact, we have another ally here in this call to me, who's also been doing quite a great job in terms of, supporting, at least in as far as Umanyoko is concerned. I think this is a question I want to throw to the audience as well. Going back to what Ricky had raised earlier in terms of the practical, in that I think what Dom is raising is that individually there are things that people who are, or men who understand that they're privileged can actually do. There are things that they can actually do practically to bring along men and women and support them. But is there a different way, and I would like to hear from you, is there a different way of looking at this so that we're not just looking at individual actions alone? Are there other strategies that we can be thinking about where we could organize differently and walk along each other? Because again, I think the challenge that has been laid to Maniko over and over again is that we always work with women alone. And we know we've talked about it, that in as much as we face these challenges in the workplaces, and that sometimes it looks like these are individual challenges, but we know they are not. So how else can we organize? How else can we look at the issue of allyship between men and women, different groups as well, other than just men and women? People who are also, who share similar experiences. They may not be the same, but similar experiences. How else can we do this? Have you tried anything where you are? Other things that I'm also mindful of the time. Other things that we have tried that may actually learn from elsewhere. I'm throwing that not just to Dom, I'm also throwing it to the audience. I don't know whether there's anybody who wants to come in. And as you are thinking about that question, there's a point from Spiwe on Facebook who is saying there's no need for our brothers to be called before they care for their sisters. We all need to see each other as colleagues. We all need to see each other as colleagues without patriarchal involvement or fear of being isolated or looked down upon, but be mutually active in every aspect in a working space. And also, I think, also wanting to bring back as well what Libby had raised around organizations creating spaces for these kinds of conversations to take place, and for the shifts that we want to see to be seen. So yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts? Is there anywhere where you have seen different ways of organizing between men and women working that we can actually tap into? Are there experiences that we have seen elsewhere? I'm not seeing the chat. I'm not sure that there's anybody who wants to raise their hand and speak to that. I know it's a difficult question, but of course, like these conversations are not conversations just for the sake of it. We actually want to see different ways, like we really want to build our power, and we know we can't just do it alone. Busi is saying we need deliberate and transformational leadership. How do we get that leadership? And we know we can't just do it alone. Yeah.
And I think as other people are thinking about this, the quote that comes to my mind, it's not really a quote, and I'm probably getting this wrong, but let me try to capture the sentiment that we ought not to be making decisions about us without us. Hence why I'm saying that there's nothing that can be done in the corporate space without the deliberate inclusion of women, because you know your challenges better than any of us ever will. And therefore you'll also know the solutions requiring the best support better than I ever will. Should I know better? Absolutely, but let me make a simple example. Look at the insurance industry, How it is that you can have an industry and we measure risk, and how it is that we define that we measure risk, we believe that it is an objective measure, right? It's objective. Insurance doesn't care about your race, your gender, your age, it's objective. But here's an example. I grew up in a home where both my mother and my father had a grade 10 education. And for those that grew up in their era, it was standard 8 or from 3. So if you remember those, you grew up with my parents. They never finished their high school, and they were both unemployed since I was 6 years old. And therefore I grew up in that kind of household where there were these financial challenges daily, and even one meal a day is something that we could not take for granted. I was able to go to the former Model C schools and eventually to university through bursaries and scholarships that then enabled me to get out of the circumstance which I was born in. But anyhow, fast forward to my working career. I am now working, I'm there, I'm in Unilever, and I'm like, okay, I now need to go buy a car, but now I don't have a license, let me get a license, and eventually I get my license at the age of 23. I was fortunate enough that I was doing some part-time work, and I began to earn enough part-time that I could afford to buy myself a car, because this was like, the dream that I had. So I've now had my license for a year. I'm 24 years old and I'm purchasing this car. So it was a BMW 1 Series, because it was my dream to have a BMW 1 Series. Anyway, that was my own self-worth things and issues that I've needed to get over. But that's besides the point. I then called the insurance company and they asked me the question, so how long have you had your license? And like, I've had my license for 12 months. And let me draw a parallel. I've got my business partner who's the exact same age as me. He received his license at the age of 18. He was able to receive it at the age of 18 as a white male because his parents could provide that for him and could afford to purchase a license for him. So at the age of 24, he already had 6 years driver's experience. Me, I had 1 year driving experience. They then asked me, so which area do you live in? Understanding the South African context and what it is that socioeconomically it means, him living in Morningside versus the area that I was living in had a fundamentally different impact from a risk assessment perspective. All right. To cut a long story short, if we are not bringing these kinds of perspectives regarding how socioeconomically we can disadvantage people through no fault of their own, we will think that certain systems are objective when they're not. My first insurance premium that was quoted was 3,600 Rand. All right. Make no mistake, right now in South Africa, this is not hypothetical. People that come from previously disadvantaged backgrounds are paying more for insurance, and they're paying more for interest on bank loans that they're getting out by virtue of how it is that the society is structured. Now, if I don't bring that racial perspective and the understanding of how it is that the society that apartheid South Africa constructed, and me as a previously disadvantaged person could only get a license at the age of 23 rather than 18, because I could not afford it. If I don't bring that perspective, I cannot be challenging people in ways that then says, how can we look at insurance differently? How can we look at supporting women differently? How can we look at different enablers so that we as men can be able to support that because you understand it? But I can bring my privilege, I can bring my influence in order to ensure that that which you're advocating for, I can actively support it, even though it may not be my personal struggle.
Whew. That is so true. I think, and I'm not sure if I'm hearing you right, because I'm listening to you. I'm also looking at the comments there from on the chat, and I think, Ricky, if you, I will call you in, and when you come in, please also look at the chat. I think you are also bringing the issue of the intersections around the different struggles that we are faced with, that we also need to be mindful of. So it's not just a matter of women organizing with men. There are a lot of other issues like this. The issues that we are dealing with are quite complex, and therefore, in terms of our own responses, in terms of our own strategies, we also need to bring those intersections. Thanks a lot for bringing that point, Dom, because we have a tendency to look at our issues as like in a narrow way, and in the reality is that the world is not like that. Yeah, Ricky, do you want to come in? And perhaps you could also start, and I think what Dumi is raising is also in line with that. Do you want to come in on that, Ricky?
Thanks, Thembela. So I'm going to read what's in the chat, and then I'm just going to reflect back what has been brought up in the discussion. So Dumi has written in the chat, we all know that the challenges that women are confronted with at work are systemic. A system has a way to self-sustain, and whoever benefits from it will try to keep it going. It is when we all learn and see that when we deny fellow humans the right or opportunity to showcase their natural gifts and talents, we deny ourselves and all of humanity the great gifts that can only come through that person, man or woman. We all lose, and unless then we can become. When others among us cannot fully express themselves, it is not a smart thing to oppress another. So just summarizing the discussion and the discussion spaces we've been through today, when we were having this discussion with Dom, asking about why should there be allyship between male and female colleagues, why why is it important in the first place? What are the ways that it can happen? And how do we give it life? So how do we create this kind of collaboration? Dom started off telling us something that opened everybody's eyes, that the personification of an organization, and in his experience in the many organizations he's worked with, is often white male and Christian, which means that that is the people who own, that's the person, the personification that owns the organization. So often what our poll was telling us, the experiences that people are having where female leaders and female bosses and female colleagues are much more difficult to collaborate and work with, is a result of that systemic reality. He was pointing out to us that in order to succeed, you have to assimilate into a value system that is representative of the personification of an organization. More often than not, white male Christian. He then went on to say that it's important, though, to have allyship with male colleagues. Number one, because they already have an existing level of privilege and influence, and because that level of privilege and influence can be lent to women and women's issues in the workplace in order to ensure that they're heard, in order to ensure that they are implemented. He also pointed out the intersectional difficulties of just organizing amongst women, saying that even if you organize just amongst women, there's always intersectional differences and difficulties, particularly on race, organizing amongst women. But where we moved on from there was saying that it's really important to understand that the organization is the place, the space where adults need to be educated and are doing the work of unlearning the systemic oppressions and the systemic inequalities that we're conditioned to in our daily lives, in our social lives from when we were very young. We had a brief discussion about the particular impacts of COVID-19 and how the pandemic has really been able to show what are some of the problems. It's been able to, he used the phrase that it has been a system revealing event. We have been able to see what doesn't work in the workplace, down, starting from the realization that, hey, we can work remotely, to the realization that employees, whether male or female, are full and complete human beings and cannot leave aspects of themselves and their lives behind when they enter the workplace. And so some of the issues that COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown has surfaced are males who are wanting to be more involved in their homes, and are women who are clear that there needs to be a better understanding of the burden of care that they carry in their homes. And so Dom pointed out that we need to figure out how to negotiate space differently, how to be more compassionate, and how to renegotiate what delivery is in the workspace. So the pandemic really has raised a lot of questions for us, but he wasn't sure that we have yet come to the place where we can do the change, and we have really imagined what a new post-COVID-19 workplace can look like. In terms of how to generate allies, Dom advised that male colleagues really need to understand that they do hold privilege and power. I wrote down what he said. When you're in a position of power, you have the power to decide what is seen as good and bad. And so by simply being conscious of that privilege and power, they can step in as allies to provide space, to provide opportunities, to provide cover by pointing out the inequalities. And now we've come back in full circle to the difficult question, which I think we haven't been really able to address in this session, is we can talk about what happens at the individual level, and we can talk about how individuals can step up and can step forward and show allyship with women in the workplace. But I don't think that we have yet been able to grapple with what does it take to systemically dismantle the inequality, not on the one-on-one, day-to-day, the small issue basis, but what are the big systemic issues that need to be addressed. And I think that has a lot to do with where our discussion started, that the workplace is a microcosm of society, and that the systemic issues are not just in the workplace. That's what Dom was telling us in the end when he was talking about insurance, and how so much of what we take for granted as fact, as making sense, as objective and reasonable, is in fact questionable. So we have to do so much work in order to identify what are those key issues, what are the problematic practices, what are the problematic norms and beliefs that we have all worked with, that we need to challenge. And the last thing that Dom said, and he has said this throughout his engagement, is ultimately the people who can point out the problem are the women who are suffering, are the women who are suffering the inequality in the workspace. So I hope that gives us a good summary of the territory we've walked today. It has been a complex discussion, and we didn't even get into the levels of complexity because, as Nandi pointed out at the beginning of the session, there are so many bodies that don't fall easily into a man-woman binary. And so there are a lot of people who also have perspectives and experiences who haven't been provided the space in our discussion. And there are also the intersectionalities of what it means to be a Black woman or to be a Black queer woman, and the differences of experiences and the packing on of inequalities. So it's a very difficult discussion that we've tried to have today, but I want to say thank you to Dom because he has really helped us to see that ultimately it's about the practical changes, the willingness to unlearn and the willingness to step forward in allyship. Yeah, that's it from me, Tamela.
Thanks, Ricky. Thanks so much for helping us with synthesizing this complex discussion. I actually I will call in Cher to close us off. Thank you so much. That was really, really helpful because it's all, like when we engage in these kinds of discussions, there's so many things that come up. It's always good to surface and sift through a lot of the discussion so that when you leave, you are able to say, what am I taking away from this? And I think I would want to ask you, like, who are still in the discussion, perhaps you could leave us with thoughts and ideas that you think we need to take forward from this discussion. And perhaps, again, going back to what Nandi was saying, what are the other, as we think about this whole thing of powering ourselves for the new normal, what are the other topics that we need to be looking at? What are the things that we are not seeing we should be paying attention to? So perhaps you could just throw some of your thoughts on the chat. On that note, I want to call Cher to close us off.
Yeah, thanks, Tamela. Oh, wow, Dom, thank you. I think we really appreciate your time. We appreciate that you brought us into your picture to show us a perspective that I think has been quite enlightening for a lot of us, and from the chats it's definitely shown that. So thank you so much. For everyone who came on today, thank you for participating. Thank you, Jumi, for being our long life supporter at Womanica. We so appreciate your input and for journeying with us. I think one of the most amazing things for us at Womanica is that we have men who are allies to us, and so today's conversation showed that yes, there are men out there who are good allies to us and help push our work forward. And so thank you for joining us. I think one of the things, I'll just tell you my quick takeaway as the rest of you throw your takeaways onto the chat for us. I think one of the things that I'm going to walk away with is my responsibility in all of this. Dom said something, he said, as a man, he can never truly know the experience of a woman until I can bring him into my picture. And I think in the workplace, we all have that responsibility, that we can't have an expectation that men are just going to go out there and champion our cause until we can bring them into the picture and let them see through our perspective what it is we're facing or what our challenges are. And so that's definitely something I'm going to take to think about as I go out there looking for allies. How am I helping to raise their awareness? So when they do have that seat at the table and they can champion my cause or make space for me, that they're doing it with knowledge and awareness that I helped bring them into. So I do hope that today you take something away. There was so much gold that got dropped on us today and so much different perspectives. And yes, this is a start to a long journey, but one that we know that together we can definitely make small wins. So thank you again for joining us. Please do share a takeaway with us. And every week we tell you this: if you're not part of our WhatsApp group, please drop your number and we'll add you to our WhatsApp group. So that's where we kind of keep you up to date during the week. And if you haven't yet joined us on a Monday for a Mellow Monday session, then for for self-care, then you definitely need to join us next Monday. And we look forward to seeing you there. So from Tembele, Ricky, and myself, thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you either on Monday or on Thursday. Dom, again, thank you so much. We wish you well with all your endeavors. And thank you for making space for the woman around you.
Absolutely. No, thank you very much for the invite. And I do hope there was some value through our engagement. And I think as a parting shot, the only thing that I'm trying to drive for in my life is as follows. Number one, how do we produce a system of justice with the recognition that the current system we're living in is built on injustice and mistreatment? And for me, a system of justice is number one, how do we guarantee that nobody is mistreated because of their identity? How do we guarantee that nobody's mistreated? And number two, how do we ensure that those that need the most help receive the most constructive help? If we keep those two things in mind within our organizations, within our corporates, within our society, we'll actually solve for that which currently seems like an insurmountable challenge that we're facing. But thank you for the time.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dom, and thanks, everyone.
Stop and say goodbye. We want to hear your voices. You want to say goodbye. So do go ahead, unmute.
Thank you. Thank you, Dom.
Thank you,
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Who's the little person? We love little people here.
Yes.